All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to talk about ground effect. If you go to 5-11 of your text, basically what you're going to see is the intro into ground effect and explaining what it is. And I've decided to do a video or put together a video to kind of demonstrate what happens in ground effect. So not only are you reading it in the book, but you can actually see it in simulation. Um, in my own terms, ground effect is basically the interference of the airflow patterns around the wing. And so this would indicate that the aircraft is probably going to fly a little bit different close to the ground as opposed to in the air. And when I think of terms of close to the ground, I'm thinking of within one wingspan of the Earth. All right. So basically, what did I want to do? I don't know. Let's talk about the four forces of flight. Now, normally, uh, the four forces of flight, well, not normally, they're always going to be lift. The four basic forces of flight are going to be lift, thrust, weight, and drag. But when we get within one wingspan of the aircraft, of the ground, I'm sorry, the drag is reduced. All right, the total sum of the total drag is reduced, and you'll still have the same amount of lift and thrust. So as a result, you don't need as much thrust, and you'll be generating a whole lot of lift with a reduced amount of drag, and so the aircraft would seem as if it doesn't want to land, or it could take off before its recommended takeoff speed. All right, and I will talk about some issues that may come about. Now, due to this ballooning, if you would, sorry, all right, so if we just read this first paragraph, ever since the beginning of manned flight, pilots realized that just before touchdown, it would suddenly feel like the aircraft did not want to go lower. So you're trying to land, your intentions are to land, but just before touchdown, the aircraft doesn't want to go any lower. It does not want to settle down to the ground, because, which is what you want to do if you're landing. It would just go on and on and on, which means it would like kind of balloon down the runway instead of landing. This is due to the air that is trapped between the wing and the landing surface, as if it were a cushion. This phenomenon is called ground effect. So, actually, birds naturally take advantage of this. I don't know. His fiance. Okay, I got distracted. All right, so birds. I love fishing. I don't know if you've ever seen, I don't know if you guys are nature buffs or whatever, but birds actually take advantage of ground effect. I don't know if you've ever seen birds kind of flap a little bit and then they just extend their wings like this, and they just kind of just get a long glide, and you're like, wow, they're actually naturally taking advantage of ground effect. So ground effect just does not happen over the earth; it also happens over the water. So let's come back and hear what's going on. Above one wingspan, we have a natural upwash and downwash, or a normal upwash and downwash. So as this aircraft flies through the air, it has a natural tendency, or the air molecules have a natural tendency to kind of jump up to meet the wing and then fall off. So this is characterized by upwash and downwash. You'll hear that a lot in a lot of aviation books and stuff like that when they talk about ground effect. Normal upwash and downwash, because there's no ground here. Ground is not interfering with the airflow patterns. Thus, we don't have ground effect. So now when we come down here to the surface or within one wingspan, now we have a reduced upwash and downwash tendency of the air molecules. And so the total drag is reduced, but we still have the same amount of lift and thrust. All right, and this could be a problem if you're not cognizant of it. So let's say you're coming down, follow my arrow for landing, all right? And your intentions is to land on the first third of the runway, right? But you come down and ground effect hits you. And you're like, wow, it doesn't want to land, and it keeps floating and floating and floating and floating and floating and floating and floating, and then you touch down here. All right, there is not enough runway to come to a full stop, so you don't want to hurt yourself. Now, I don't want you to be scared, like, oh my God, ground effect. Don't worry about that. Your instructor will teach you how to prepare for it and to make adjustments for it. So that's landing. Let's say takeoff. All right. Now, you start to take off here. You're clear for takeoff, runway 24, or whatever that number is. Okay. So you're clear for takeoff. You pull back on the yoke and the airplane, boom, just jumps in the air. All right. Let's just say that the recommended takeoff speed would not be reached until this point. Well, you jump up in the air, bang, right here. You're fine as long as you're within one wingspan. If you fly outside of one wingspan or higher than one wingspan, your aircraft could abruptly settle to the ground because the drag comes back when we talked about the 4 forces of flight. All right. When the ground effect occurs, this arrow is not as strong, doesn't have the same magnitude. All right. So it's small, it's shorter, but we got all this lift and all this thrust going on, and more thrust that's actually even required. All right. And the wings will be generating the lift that it normally does, or maybe a little bit higher because less lift or coefficient of lift is required. So let's come on back here and come down. So we have a chart to indicate or show you what's going on. We have two situations as far as our thrust required and our lift coefficient of lift. And in an early video I spoke about coefficient of lift. At this point, just think of it as the amount of lift being generated. All right. So lift required, or the coefficient of lift, how much lift are we producing? If we're in ground effect, we have a lot of lift, more lift being generated. But then when you come out of ground effect, this drops. Okay, so the solid arrow is when we're out of ground effect. So we want to make sure that we're at our recommended takeoff speed before we fly outside of one wingspan. All right, let's talk about thrust required. Out of ground effect and in ground effect. Thrust required. You don't need that much thrust when you're in ground effect. So if you're landing, you know it's a hot, humid day, what you're going to do is you may come in at a slower than usual airspeed because you don't need that much thrust. The more airflow you have over your wings, the higher your coefficient of lift, the more lift that your wings are generating, and it's just going to cause some more ballooning. So you definitely don't want to overspeed when you're landing. Conversely, when you're taking off, if the aircraft breaks ground, you're just going to level out over the ground until you reach your recommended takeoff speed, and then you can climb out. All right, so I've positioned us in Texas or Florida. Anyways, in the summertime, it's very, very hot down there. And let's see if we can't find a temperature gauge in here. That would be cool if we could find a temperature gauge. All right. Let's see if we can, I'm curious as to what the simulator, how it's going to act, so I know, forgive me guys. All right, ATIS is 134.63. So all right, 134.63. Engine, main panel, main switches, radio, GPS. All right. It helps when what was that again? I think it was 134.65. No, 134.63. Can't be 6.3. Or I guess we're supposed to listen over a
5,700. Temperature 15. Dew point 5. Altimeter 2902. ILS runway.
Alright, temperature 15. That's really not that hot. And I set it for summertime, so. Simulator's not playing with us today. So, alright, that's fine. We'll go through the procedure anyway. And we'll come back to our virtual cockpit. And so, basically, if we become airborne too early, we're going to level off above the runway, reach our recommended takeoff speed, and then, how do I kill that? Well, it doesn't matter. I can just push it to the side. Or, no, you can't. All right. Close window. There you go. So, basically, what's going to happen is we're going to pretend that we've become airborne before our recommended takeoff speed. And simply all we're going to do, and this will be like a natural thing if you know it's a hot and humid day, you'll note your speed when you break ground, and you'll just level off above the runway, and then you'll climb out. And then conversely, when we come back for a landing, what's going to happen is we will come in with full flaps, and we'll come in a lot slower, a little bit slower than we normally would. And then so the amount of the lift coefficient will be reduced. We'll have full flaps, so it's kind of like we'll come in as slow as we can. All right, so here we go. Airspeed alive. Rudder's a little squirrely. Alright, so let's say we came airborne before our recommended takeoff speed. We just gently lower the nose and we're level above the runway. Alright, and then when we build up speed, then we can climb out at that point. That's when it's safe. If we just pull back, we can abruptly settle down to the ground, and that would be a bad day. Okay, so runway 19. Okay, this is the up one leg of the pattern. We're going to turn crosswind. And we'll turn to our down one leg. So that's our runway. We're in the down one leg right now. So we're perpendicular to the runway and flying the opposite direction of the runway heading. Let's get back on task. Close it down, landing gears down. Okay, so on a really hot, humid day, we want to come in nice and we want to just come in slower. So let's say, for instance, we would normally come in at, say like, I don't know, 80 knots. Well, if I know I'm experiencing ground effect, what I'm going to do is I'll probably come in at 70 or 65 knots with full flaps, of course. But we have our descent going on, and we'll go ahead and turn our base leg. turn final at this point. Alrighty. So on a very, very hot and humid day, to combat ground effect, get our speed worked out. This puppy does not want to slow down, I'll tell you that. Full flaps and everything. Right. Okay, we're back on final approach runway 19. This is not working out because I would like to be slower. I've been idle for, oh, there we go. Yeah, she didn't want to go idle for a minute there. So basically, we would have liked to have been idle, so our airspeed is slower, but we would probably want our touchdown speed somewhere around here, around 60, 65 knots. And there's a little ballooning there. And touchdown. So we're finally down underground. So the gist of this was to just be a little bit slower on our final approach speed. And what the hell? Normally you would not turn this early, but now, when I hit the flaps retract button, basically what happens is it goes to this small window thing, and all right. And I just worked out that bug. Okay, great. So there's our runway right there. And I just wanted the approach speed to be right. And I just couldn't like walk away without making sure we did it right. Okay, so notch flaps in. We're in the down one leg. There's our approach into the runway. Landing gear down a lot. How are we doing on our runway? Okay, that's pretty decent. We'll go ahead and turn base. This is the base leg. Bring it on around the final. This was the problem before. The engine did not want to go idle. So we come in at our takeoff speed. We want to be slow. Now we were like damn near like at 100 knots. And so now we're going to get the desired flight conditions we want. Always fly the airplane. Don't let the airplane fly you. Okay, so we're at 80 knots. This would be a normal approach speed in this case. Okay, but if we have ground effect, we want to come in even slower. And I'll pause for a minute because this is 100, that's 80, and that's 60. So we want to be closer to 60 when we get over that runway. So this way, we have less of a coefficient of lift going on, less lift being generated. So this way, because if we have less lift being generated and we come back, when we're in ground effect, thrust required, okay? In ground effect, we don't need that much thrust and we don't need that much lift. So we're going to be in a slower flight condition. But you must be skilled at slow flight because you're right above a stall, okay? So this is something that you're going to have to practice and have your coordination down because you stall, that's bad too. But you don't want to float down the runway, and you don't, so there's a fine line that you have to walk. All right, and that's okay if you're trained. All right, so we'll come in. And notice the approach is just a lot gentler. We're slower, so we don't need as much thrust, which is going to affect our coefficient of lift or amount of lift being generated. So we'll come in even 70. You'll have your coefficient of lift will be lower. Now I'm coming in at 70 because when we round out and flare, our airspeed is actually going to bleed off, and this is much nicer, much nicer. All right, so that ground effect doesn't even have a chance to play with us. All right, and here comes our round out and our flare. Butter. That's butter right there. All right, so I'm actually glad I went around. All right. So that's ground effect, folks. So let's pause simulation and come on back. So we saw how when I took off, all right, I leveled out over the ground until I reached my recommended takeoff speed. After I reached my recommended takeoff speed, then I did my climb out. And then conversely, when we landed, I came in at a slower than normal approach than I usually would, because if we have excess speed, we're going to have a greater coefficient of lift going on, and we don't need that much lift. Okay, if we're in ground effect, the coefficient of lift is actually going to be greater because we lost the drag, so it's going to fight harder. All right, the lift is just going to be generating lots of lift, and you saw how it just came in at a slower airspeed. I actually generated a smaller coefficient of lift, or generating smaller amounts of lift, and it just worked out really, really nice. So that my round out, my flare was just nice, and like I said, it was butter. It was smooth. I think that's all I want to talk about on ground effect. So again, the definition: ground effect is the interference of the airflow patterns around the wing. Up here, everything is good because we have a normal upwash and downwash effect going on, as opposed to when we're within one wingspan of the earth or runway. Then what's going to happen is we get a reduced upwash, downwash. Notice that these arrows are they're a little bit shorter and lighter, so they don't have as much strength as what the author is trying to indicate. So that's ground effect, guys. Thanks for watching. I'm Kino with STEMwithKino.com. Bye-bye.